Class, MASH. By A. Nutty. Chapter 31, Crawl's Walls. They got up early in the morning, just before the sunrise. MASH had been woken up by Luke, who took the last watch. He didn't mind waking up early and believed that they could make the entire trip to Crawl today. Using inhuman hibernation slightly removed any lingering drowsiness and fatigue. This effect of his skill was one of his favorites, it seemed to heal him regardless of the nature of the damage. They climbed down from the tree, and MASH noticed that his treehouse hadn't decayed at all. He didn't know if it was decaying slower or would no longer decay. For a quick test he made a simple wooden bracelet and would see if it deteriorated. If his creations remained, he would be leaving potential bases wherever they stopped, and thought that he should strive to make them nicer. Deciding to use Luke's buffs, they began their flight. Since they were going for speed this time, Luke was using his mana to improve MASH's speed as much as possible. His buffs were improved now and would double MASH's speed for as long as they lasted. They would be able to keep them active for most of the journey since Luke could recover his mana while they flew. His buffs did look different now, and markings of light covered MASH's entire form, the wood included. He was glowing now and wondered what the people below would think. Well, it would probably be less frightening than his wings normally were. Surprisingly, Jill and Red managed to fall asleep, ignoring the sounds of the wind. MASH made a wall in front of them to block the force of the wind but could do nothing for the sound of rushing air. Sunrise had changed to sundown, and they kept flying. According to the maps they would see the first of the city's watchtowers soon and flew lower to the ground. Luke's buffs now shone brightly against the dark of night, and he thought that was a good thing. With lights like these, he hoped that the city would not see him as a threat. Otherwise, he would need to land a distance out from the city and travel on foot. They didn't talk much while traveling, both because they needed to yell to communicate, and the silence was nice while observing the sights below. There was a surprising amount of life beneath them, from the natural movement of the trees and the birds that flew above the treetops. The sight was amazing. It resembled a field of grass, but each blade was instead a leaf, the variety of the trees changing the terrain. The wind blew against the trees, making it seem strangely fluid like a lake. The night had changed the view slightly, but it was still beautiful. Eventually, they managed to spot the watchtower, and knew that the trip was almost over. Picking up the pace, MASH flew a bit more eagerly. When something slammed against his left wing, causing him to sway awkwardly, he had to focus on correcting his flight. Concentrating on maintaining the flight, he inspected the damage. A metal arrow that was twice the length of a sword, punctured through his wings, and he could feel mana connecting it to the floor behind them. He dislodged the section of his wood around the arrow, letting it fall to the floor beneath. That shot hadn't come from the watchtower. Bandits! He yelled the words, but didn't need to, Red already forming a shield of blood around them. It would drain her mana quickly, but she should be able to last for the remainder of the trip. The bigger issues were deciding where to land. In this situation the decision fell to MASH, and he had to choose between the watchtower and the city. Both would be likely to attack him if he flew straight towards them, so the better option would be to land in the plains outside the city. They would risk some attacks from the bandits if they were close to the forest, but Jill would be able to teleport them to the city quickly. It was the strategy they had for a crash landing but would work perfectly here. Dashing past the watchtower, he took another arrow in his wings. It was much closer to his body, and he could feel the high amount of mana surging through it. He wasn't surprised that it managed to punch through Red's blood shield, having shot through his wing like it wasn't there. However, that meant he didn't have to deal with it sticking and only needed to repair his wings. His flight was growing more erratic, as he tried to vary his path more. Thankfully, no other arrows managed to reach him, and they made it past the watchtower. There were still no attacks from the watchtower, and he hoped that the town would react similarly. He didn't risk it though, aiming for a place close enough to the walls to be seen but not be imposing. He separated from his wings as he landed, letting himself crash to the ground. Falling unconscious for only a moment, he regained his senses as Luke and Red healed him. Jill didn't stop either, teleporting them closer to the city. It turned out to be unnecessary as no attacks were headed towards them. They ran towards the entrance, while everyone else ran. MASH was being carried by Luke so he could meditate while moving. It was not shameful, despite the jokes he would receive for it later. It only took a few minutes to get to the gates, and he made sure to arrive on his own feet. The walls themselves were made of wood, unlike the stone ones from back home. Noticing it was made from the darker wood they saw on the larger trees. They stood only a little above the height of the surrounding trees and was shorter than the tree they camped on. The gates were enormous too, a set of doors that seemed impossible to open. It would either require magic or a high-leveled person. It was probably a security measure, requiring specific individuals to open and close them. They were open now, and he could vaguely make out shapes on the top, but none had drawn their weapons. Obviously, they didn't consider Mash and his friends a threat. It didn't seem to matter to the guards, raising their spears at them once they saw Mash. They were clearly singling him out, most likely due to his appearance, so he pulled out his adventurer badge preemptively. He figured it would work and having Luke around was already making them relax. The soldiers still took up a formation to cut off any escape routes, and he got a good look at them. Unlike the knights from back home, none of the soldiers wore metal armor. Instead, they had a combination of leather and hide, wielding a wide variety of weapons. They were all beastmen, many of which were clearly from different tribes. Two of them stepped ahead of the crowd and approached them. Responding, Luke took a few steps forward. Mash followed behind, wanting to be close enough to hear and talk if necessary. "Brother, welcome home. Who are those behind you?" The man who spoke didn't look much older than them, and his voice was higher than he expected. It wasn't obnoxious but didn't fit his large frame. He wore a full set of leather armor, which didn't protect much, as he left his chest open. He seemed to have the barbarian class because of the many tribal tattoos that wrapped around his body. Mash knew those markings were typical of the class, but he could be faking it. Taking in his face, he doubted that it was fake since he seemed to be containing his anger. Mash could see a vein bulging on his forehead and was drawn to his beastman traits. The man had ears that drooped slightly, and gave Mash an impression of a dog. The other distinctive feature of his race was his tail. It was thicker and fluffier than a dog's, resembling a wolf's tail more closely. His fur was dark brown, and his hair was cleanly combed back. He was probably attractive, but it wasn't as obvious as it was for the man from the auction. Mash hadn't seen many beastmen with tails, even among these guards only 3 of them had the feature. He wondered if there was an advantage to having a tail and considered testing it later, since doing it now would probably seem offensive. He could grow a tail easily enough. "Brother? I've never been here before." Luke was clearly confused, though he sounded a little happy. The man noticed and replied with sympathy in his voice. "It's meant to be symbolic. All beastmen have had family here, so we are all considered family. So, why are you here?" "My name is Luke, and these guys are my friends. We're adventurers here to challenge the dungeon and explore the city." The man was not surprised since they all made their badges visible earlier. He understood, nodding along to Luke's words. Although, he didn't fully seem to trust them and continued to look at them skeptically. He introduced himself, trying to act imposing, an obvious ploy to pressure them. "I'm Captain Davin, and this is Deputy Commander Ellis. You're free to enter, and your friends will be let in as a show of trust towards you. However, they're your responsibility and will be watched closely. As for the dungeon, it's currently unsafe for adventurers of your level. Several bandits have snuck in there, and they attack any low-level adventurers. Did you encounter any bandits on your way?" As Luke gave him a rundown of their journey, Mash took the opportunity to measure their mana. Both were a lot stronger than him, and he felt Ellis doing something similar in return. Mash glanced at her, and she winked at him. Becoming a little embarrassed at the gesture, he had never been spotted before, at least no one had indicated that they knew. He was impressed that someone could tell and looked over her more carefully. Almost a foot taller than Mash himself, she wore a full set of hide armor. It came from some scaled creature, and the armor had a bluish hue to them. It covered her entire body but clung closely to her form, and Mash thought that she was attractive. Noticing his heartbeat rising, he used meditation to try gain more self-control. The skill was proving more versatile by the minute and returned his body to its normal state, but he worried that this would also affect his mind. He didn't know which aspects of the skill would affect him negatively, and it was too useful to ignore. He would need to ask Red about it later but was not looking forward to that conversation. Ellis undoubtedly knew he did something to himself, but either didn't know exactly what or didn't care. Not wanting to let his eyes wander, he kept them on her face. She was pretty and had light brown hair that grew in a messy way. It was cut short and didn't hang lower than her eyes, which were sharp and narrow and made her seem like she was looking down on him. There was a single scar that started below her right eye and ran down along her neck. She had slightly curved ears that were covered in fur that matched her hair. She didn't have a tail though, and other than her ears had no noticeable differences. He realized he was staring and decided to pay more attention to the conversation. "Thank you." Luke was thanking him for accepting them, and Mash nodded along. The captain just dismissed the gratitude. He didn't give Luke time to add anything else and spoke while guiding them to the gates. "Welcome to Crawl. Oh, and by the way, we're both over level 150. Dropping that information so casually caused all of them to stop and stare at the two. Mash wanted to know how close to 200 they were, or if they already passed that point. Either way, it meant that they were probably a lot older than they looked. He refrained from asking the question, guessing that Davin wouldn't give them more information. This was most likely a ploy to intimidate them. That didn't mean that it was untrue though, and he walked a little more hesitantly. It had been effective. Chapter 32, The Wandering Moon. Davin opened the gates without struggling in the slightest. The doors weren't normal though, sliding open. Mash could see that they were as thick as the wall itself. Mash's eyes moved past the doors quickly and stuck to the scene before him. He could feel his eyes go wide as he stared at the open plains. The walls covered over twice as much ground as his home, but the city felt strangely smaller. He breathed in deeply, his lips quirking into a smile as he smelled the air. It didn't have the bustle of crowds and scents that you could only find in a city, instead he saw a scattering of villages spread across the grasslands. No overly tall or condensed buildings, the only people this far out seemed to be guards. The buildings were scattered, and he just stared dumbly at them. Unsure of any direction, he asked the others. Where should we go?" Shrugging his shoulders, Luke looked towards Davin. Nodding, he pointed into the distance, and Mash was barely able to make out some outlines of buildings. "That's Moonshire and is also where the guild is. If you go there, I recommend going to the Wandering Moon Inn, it's got the best meat pies." Deciding it was best to get on Davin's good side, Mash nodded to him in thanks. It could only be beneficial to get high-level people as friends. The guards didn't react as the group waved goodbye. They started departing towards the village, or would it be a district? Did all the scattered villages make up the city? He didn't know if he considered this place a city. A gleam in Luke's eyes told Mash what he thought of this place. He kept turning his head frantically, as if this couldn't be reality. In fairness, the city didn't match the descriptions he heard before. He expected to see wooden, old-fashioned structures, and the city was supposed to be much smaller. The descriptions they found must have been old because the reality was very different. "Should we go to the inn or just make a camp somewhere? I mean, there is a lot of space for it and Mash could do it pretty easily." Jill brought up the idea, sounding strangely conflicted. He noticed her lick her lips, and he guessed that she was hungry too. In fact, none of them have eaten any food today. Checking the bracelet he made last night, he found it unblemished. Guessing that his new wood wouldn't degrade anymore, he didn't know if it was a good idea to make a house here. I don't think they would like new houses to just pop up. Especially considering how they would look. Mash revealed the bracelet he made and explained how his creations seemed to be permanent now. He would keep the bracelet on for now, checking it again to confirm the theory. If they really didn't decay, then he could start selling them. He thought they would sell well among the cults, at least the evil ones. He found himself grinning slightly at the thought. As they walked, they simply enjoyed the peaceful nature that this town provided. They weren't afraid of monsters within the walls and had spotted animals like bulls and horses running through the plains. It reminded him of the painting of the Elven city, both seemed so intertwined with nature. Were humans the only ones to live within the security of stone? He was about to ask the others what they thought but felt something entering his mana territory. He didn't let anything show on his face, as he felt the person getting closer. Seeing that they had a tail, he guessed they were a beastman, probably a guard meant to watch them. It wasn't a perfect image, rather he could make out their general shape from their mana. Still wanting to get on the good side of the guards, he called out to him. I can see you." Turning to face him, he spoke without hesitation, but didn't really know what to do. This situation was awkward, since he essentially caught someone who was stalking them. Thankfully, the awkwardness ended as they revealed themselves. The person seemed to peel apart the light to reveal themselves. Coming into vision, he recognized the face and ears, and he found himself gaping a little. A spitting image of Ellis, the girl stood as tall as Mash himself. She had a tail that matched the light brown color of her ears and hair, a mimicry of the deputy commander. She didn't dress the same way, instead wearing robes that covered most of her body and hid her figure. They were a dark shade of green, and was patterned with black markings, an enchantment of some kind. The others jumped a little as she revealed herself. Guessing that she was Ellis's sibling, he tried to be polite as he addressed her. Hello. I'm Mash, and your magic is quite impressive. He didn't really know how to speak politely, using what his sister had told him to do. She had given him a book as a reference, and he remembered that it was considered polite to compliment a lady when he met them. It didn't work, a grimace covering her face, and glare staring him down. You don't need to make fun of me. And before you ask, I'm supposed to follow you, I mean the deputy commander's orders. Her voice carried an edge, and Mash thought on his words. Realizing his own mistake, he wanted to apologize but knew that would make it worse. Anything he did would make it seem like he was treating her as a child. He was saved by Red, who spoke before he could dig himself deeper. I'm Red, but I guess you already knew that. Well, since we know you're going to follow us, how about joining us for now? We don't mind. She sounded strangely familiar with situations like this and spoke naturally. They looked at each other, seeming to come to an understanding. The girl looked over the group, staring at each of their faces before lingering on Luke. Coming to a decision, she responded to them with a surprising lack of hesitation. Sure, why not? I'm Leah by the way. Almost too naturally she lined up between Red and Luke, making Mash wonder if this was a normal occurrence. Nobody seemed to mind and began asking her some questions about the city. Mostly asking about the bandits or the dungeon. She didn't know a lot about the dungeon but knew that the guild was currently offering a reward for any bandits who were killed or captured. That got the group excited since they never did a proper mission after the trial. They were planning on jumping from dungeon to dungeon, but it sounded like they could do both simultaneously. It didn't take long to get to Moonshire with Leah leading them. The village was empty, it might have been because of the lateness, but he couldn't spot many buildings. Even this village was surprisingly spaced out, a large amount of grass separating each structure. Easily identifying the wandering moon by a painting of a moon that hung on its sign. It was not a very detailed image, but the crescent shape gave the depiction away, not to mention the lingering smell that drew their attention. Not waiting for any confirmation, Mash pushed the doors open but remembered to go in after Luke did. Despite not spotting any crowds as they walked, it was very crowded inside of the inn. Almost every person inside was a beastman, happily eating food and sharing drinks. It was obvious when the crowd's focus changed, most beginning to shoot glances at them. Mash found it easy to ignore the stares, his hunger driving him towards the front. His rumbling stomach gave away his attention as he approached the bar. There was an old man behind the bar who was surrounded by younger workers, and Mash could only see him as a bear. Almost 2 feet taller than Mash, he was big enough to be considered 3 people. It was a mixture of muscle and fat and made his belly bulge, becoming noticeable beneath his clothing. He had a slightly rounded face, and rounded ears that were covered in a thick black fur. His arms stood out to Mash, as they were easily the size of logs. The man looked over the group, his eyes softening as they passed over Leah. However, Mash didn't give anyone else the opportunity to speak, eager to get some food. Hey there, I'm Mash. Could I get 2 full meat pies and anything else you think would be good? Don't worry, I'll finish anything you give me. The man's eyebrows rose as Mash barreled through his words. The others who heard, his friends included, were staring at him. He could hear a few people laughing behind him, but the bartender nodded all the same. He seemed to regain his composure and indicated for the person next to him to get the food, while he started speaking to the group. Sure kid. Little Leah, care to introduce your friends? I don't think I've ever seen someone quite like him. Shrugging her shoulders, Lee responded in a casual manner, giving him a quick answer. It sounded a little prepared, but the man seemed to accept it. I don't really know, I just met them, but they seem like good enough people. And he claimed to be human for what it's worth. The man let out a bellowing laugh, as if he heard the funniest thing ever. It shook the table and caused the floors to creak. When he saw their expression, he stopped, and tentatively asked Mash a question. Wait, you're really human? I was human at one point, but I think that ship has sailed. All I'm sure of right now, is that I'm hungry. Mash said the words without really thinking about them, but the man's eyes went wide, and he leaned away from the counter. Whatever expression Mash made had clearly bothered the man, but he did it unconsciously and didn't know what he had done. He looked to the others at the counter and noticed that they were looking away from him. Looking behind him, he spotted Leah's hands resting on a dagger at her waist. The tension in the room had risen, and Mash regretted not controlling his expression. Jill elbowed him, speaking loud enough to be heard across the room. I told you to stop doing that. Sorry, he's kind of dense about these things. Did he roll his eyes? He didn't think that he did, but kept his mouth shut since her words seemed to diffuse the situation. One of the people at the bar even cracking a joke at the barkeeper's expense. Look at that, Hugo frightened by someone half his size. It was like a cat being scared by a mouse. It wasn't funny, but the people were drunk, and began laughing at the joke. Mash bowed his head in apology, and Hugo waved him off. His shoulders sagged a little, maybe he felt bad about the scene too. Leah didn't let any silence build and made an order for herself. The others followed her lead and ordered some food as well. They paid together, Mash having spent 7 silvers in the meal, which meant he ordered around 7 servings of food. A typical meal back home cost between 1 and 2 silver, he would need to earn more gold, if only to satiate his hunger. It took several minutes for the food to come out, but Hugo had given them a small plate of fruits ahead of the meal. Gratefully, Mash snacked on the new fruits. The one he enjoyed the most was small, brown, and hairy on the outside. The inside was green and sweet, and he liked the way it turned to juice in his mouth. The rest of the food came out with a set of drinks for each of them. Lee explained that people couldn't drink ale until they were 18 here, so all they would get is juice. He didn't mind, preferring the sweetness of the drink over the bitter taste of alcohol. The food took all his attention, and he ate the first meat pie quickly. Several people watching him as he devoured the large amount of food in front of him. It was good, the pie was filled with meat and vegetables and its crust broke perfectly into the rest of the pie. He had seen several people eating their food with their hands and did the same, scooping up slices of the pie and shoving them into his mouth. It didn't take long for him to finish the second pie, by now the crowd had begun cheering and he felt full. He could feel his body unwinding as he finished the drink. He found himself smiling as several people clapped him on the back. To think they had been frightened of him moments ago. Chapter 33, Back on Track. After the meal they headed up to their rooms. The 4 of them would share a single room, while Leah took her own room. With that being the case, Mash felt more comfortable talking with the others. She might have a skill to listen in, but he decided that it didn't matter. He wanted to know what happened earlier. None of them were sleeping yet, each of them doing their own thing. Red was reading a book and Jill and Luke were tending to their weapons. Approaching Jill, Mash asked her a question. What happened earlier? Why did everyone get so scared? It took her a second to realize what he was talking about, but he could see the recognition hitting her eyes. She responded quizzically, her voice unable to hide her skepticism. You mean you don't know? No, I didn't mean to do anything. Mash shook his head trying to remember any details. She seemed genuinely surprised to hear that he did it unconsciously. He rolled his eyes at her as she donned a stupefied expression. That got a response out of her. You kind of glowed, but in a creepy way. Your one eye and the scars on your body shone like the snake had. Also, it felt like you were going to take a bite out of the barkeep. She sounded far too smug as she explained the situation, even adding a joke. Well, he hoped it was a joke. He couldn't find a clever response, or any response at all. Hey! That was not what he was expecting, believing that he had made a weird facial expression or something. There was nothing he could say to that, it still sounded impossible to him. He didn't know if he could stop himself, the reaction had been instinctual, it was like trying to stop his muscles from being used. He might be able to stop it with meditation but didn't know if that was safe either. That was another conversation he didn't want to have. Though he needed to ask someone about the use of the skill when they arrived at town. When he saw Ellis, he didn't want to ask Red or Jill about that topic, and left Jill to continue tending to her weapon. Though he might need to ask Red, since she was usually the one with the information. Hoping that Luke might have the knowledge, he approached him before Red. He was reading a book, and Mash sat next to him, choosing to whisper so that the others wouldn't hear. This is going to be kind of random, but do you think it's safe to use my meditation skill to control my sexual attraction? Luke was not prepared for that question, his mouth hanging open as he processed Mash's words. He blubbered for a second before managing to find the ability to respond. Even as he spoke, it was clear he was struggling to hide his embarrassment and laughter. Sorry, I don't know anything about that. I think you need to ask Red, unless it's about her. That would be awkward. Luke couldn't keep a straight face and broke into a smug grin. Mash almost thought he looked excited. Shaking his head at Luke, he gave him an answer quickly wanting to move past that topic. No, it's not because of Red or Jill. I was just thinking about it because of the auction, and, Ellis. Mash scratched the back of his head as he spoke but was surprised to see Luke nodding in agreement. Honestly, Luke seemed reserved most of the time, and thinking on it, he was fairly reserved too, so he never expected a conversation like this. Somehow, the conversation seemed to lift something off his shoulders, and he felt better about broaching the subject. Turning to head towards Red, he saw her looking at him. She must have heard her name being spoken. The fact that she knew that he was going to ask her something, somehow made him feel worse. He powered through anyways. Approaching Red, he didn't bother speaking quietly since Luke and Jill were obviously going to listen in. Look, you're the only one I can talk to about this. Do you think it's okay for me to use my meditation skill to control my sexual attraction? Even if he spoke with confidence, it didn't make the comment any less strange. He could practically see the gears turning in her head, as she heard his words. She blushed slightly and looked around frantically, while Jill and Luke began rolling on their beds with laughter. Mash couldn't stop himself from smiling, and he waited for Red's response. She was having an internal debate, but ultimately steeled herself to speak. Look, I've only ever heard of one other skill that affects a person's sexual habits. 1. It's not like I was looking for it. I think the book said that it was more of a physical thing, so it should be fine. But I don't know for certain. She was fidgeting slightly as she spoke, hiding her face in her hands. Mash contained his own laughter, thanking her genuinely, grateful for getting a real answer. It turned out that he could use the skill for that and was glad to find another use for the skill. His thoughts were cut off by a thumping from the room above. The laughter had gotten too loud but went silent at that. They didn't want to be kicked out for something stupid. However, they were even less tired now, and talked casually for a while. Mash woke up, not remembering exactly when he fell asleep. The others were still sleeping, so he took the opportunity to go for a run. Everything was moving so quickly, and he didn't have much time for his usual exercises. He made a sign and engraved a message to the others on it, before heading out of the room. After cleaning himself up in the bathroom, he headed downstairs. Entering the main area, he heard Hugo talking behind the counter. Waving, he called out to him. Hello Hugo. Do you have anything ready now? I plan on heading out for a bit. Hugo nodded, grabbing something from behind him. He spoke while getting the item ready and sounded a little hesitant. Don't have a lot but can give you something quick now, and you can get more after coming back. Where are you headed anyways? Nodding, Mash tried to respond quickly, happy to see the man speaking normally with him. Thanks, I just want to go for a run since I've never been in a city like this before. Seen plenty of people like that. Eager to spend more time outside since there is plenty of safe, open space. When's the last time a person could go for a run without risking a fight with a monster? Staring off into the distance, Hugo responded easily, an automatic reply that came from years of work. Mash took it in stride, accepting the proffered meal. It was a simple combination of fruits and cream placed between two sweet pieces of bread. He already liked the man, sweets for breakfast were truly a glorious idea. Taking it from Hugo, he paid the man and ordered more food for when he was returned. He waved goodbye as he headed out. As expected, the food was delicious, but he was more distracted with his run. There were several people outside now, most were a bit younger than him. They were playing games of some kind, and whenever one of the kids spotted him, they all stopped to stare. He could see them pointing and talking, one of the girls had even screamed monster, making him have to stop and explain his situation to her mother. The run gave him plenty of reasons to buy an illusion item. He could check the guild after the dungeon. He didn't want to buy one, only to find it in the dungeon, and he still instinctively disliked the idea. Somehow, he was able to tell that his inhumanity skill was the cause. He didn't know if he should fight the skill or not, the skill was meant to make him better. When he got back to the inn, he saw the others talking. It seemed like Leah was questioning them, and she turned to glare at him as he walked in. Spending the next few minutes getting chewed out had made him even hungrier, and he was glad to see Hugo bringing him some breakfast. He had paid for it earlier and told Hugo when he would be back. Glad for the distraction, he ate while waiting for the others to calm down. Once they finished with their meal, they made their way to the guild. When Leah brought them to the building, he just stared at it in disbelief. It was less than half the size of the inn and seemed more like a glorified shack. Entering the building made it seem even more unimpressive, though that impression died when he noticed the stairs leading down. Other than the staircase, this part of the building was an empty room with a single counter in it. A receptionist sat behind the desk and there were posters of jobs arrayed behind him. He was an older man, with wrinkles around his eyes that gave away his age. He was smiling at them pleasantly when they entered, waving a hand in greeting. He wore a simple red tunic, and had a strange, pointed hat atop his head. Trying to remember the style of clothing, he stared at the man for a few seconds. Although, when Luke and Jill went to talk to him, Mash took the opportunity to look down the stairs. They spiraled downwards, and he gasped as he looked down. It stretched endlessly, branching off into different floors and rooms. It didn't stop though, going ever deeper into the earth, far past where the light reached. That wasn't quite right though, it was more like the light was being cut off along the way. Then it hit him, this was the entrance to the dungeon, the one that they were here for. Davin had given them better directions than he realized, and he kept staring into the void. He was expecting another connection, a pull to enter. Nothing came, and he let his shoulders sag. He couldn't tell if it was relief or disappointment. He and Red were just looking down when the others arrived. They joined them in staring towards the abyss while Jill informed them on what they learned. So, there are 2 jobs we can take right now. One is hunting bandits outside the walls, and the other is hunting them down there. I would say take your pick, but it looks like we've already made one. Mash definitely had, and they started down the stairs. Stumbling down the steps quickly they talked about whether they were prepared. He knew that they were, they hadn't touched much of their food supplies and still had enough to last for 2 weeks easily. They had no injuries and spent several days relaxing already. He told them that he felt no weird connection or anything and saw them visibly relaxing. Leah just looked confused, ignoring the statement and saying that she would wait at the entrance, but she sounded hesitant. Her fists were clenched, and she looked towards the dungeon entrance with the same fervor as the rest of them. There was no need for debate or discussion, instead they used their descent to leisurely observe the many floors. The floors were diverse, and he wondered if they were typical of guilds. The guild back home was also layered, and one of the rooms had been a giant auction hall. He took a peek whenever he could and saw a few very interesting sights. One of the rooms looked like a coliseum, and he could vaguely make out movement inside. A fight, or a training session. Another had been a market, but none of the stalls were occupied. One thing that kept reoccurring were patrols of guards. He thought about what Jill told them about the bandits and how they snuck in. They pretended to be adventurers, and had silver-ranked badges so the guards didn't consider them a threat. After gaining entrance into the city, they robbed the guild and fled into the dungeon. They had classes designed around hiding and sneaking and were able to get the jump on the guards. Which explained why Davin and Ellis were watching the gates now. The others worried about the bandits, but Mash roughly knew the average strength of adventurers. Though, he was confident that they could handle the bandits. The stairs grew more uncertain, and he found it harder to find his footing. Degrading into rocks, the stairs eventually just became a slight decline that headed downwards. They approached the growing wall of shadow. He braced himself, ready for an adventure. Chapter 34, The Descent. Passing through the gate, he noticed that the start of the dungeon this time was in a cave. It stretched forwards, with a slight decline. Having questioned Leah about the dungeon, they knew the basics of what to expect. It was called the Descent, and was, as the name implied, a passage downwards. It could be through an underground tunnel or alongside a cliff. Even hearing of ledges that needed to be jumped from. They also got some information on the common types of monsters to expect. There were only a few different types of creatures they could run into, a bat-rat hybrid monster that varied drastically in size. Those occupied the cave portions of the dungeon, while chicken-like monsters crawled along the cliffs. Occasionally there would be a few rarer types, but those were the most common they would encounter. Luke used his buffs on himself, creating light in the dark cave. Once their eyes adjusted, he could see watermarks marring the walls and floors. Small puddles scattered in crevices along the ground. He looked around making sure everyone ended up in the same place and was somewhat unsurprised to see that Leah had followed them. She had been looking like she wanted to enter, but he hoped that she wouldn't. She wasn't an adventurer and would probably get in trouble for this, he had to ask. Are you allowed to be here? With Ellis around, I probably won't get in trouble. Plus, this seems far more enjoyable than just waiting. Shrugging her shoulders, she responded flatly. What she said was true enough, nobody would want to get on the bad side of someone over level 150. The bigger issue he saw, was if something happened to her, they would likely be blamed for it. He frowned at the thought, trying to think of some way to convince her. She was the most likely to be able to run away and would be able to stay safe with her invisibility. Unable to come up with something convincing, he looked to the others. They seemed at a loss for words, and he just let out a sigh, thinking that this would be annoying. Glancing at her, he knew there was no convincing her otherwise. Instead of trying to argue with her, they started discussing what her role would be, asking her a plethora of questions about her skills. The most significant thing of note was that she could remain invisible indefinitely. They decided that the best role for her would be to go for finishing blows on enemies. She would remain invisible for the whole time and share targets with Luke. Everyone else's attacks were designed around indiscriminate damage, and she would be just as likely to get hit. Mash could also avoid her since he was the only one that could see her, but it was only within a range and too risky. Coming up with a basic plan had been enough for her, and they proceeded into the dungeon. Mash didn't lead the way anymore, his mana territory's range being enough to react even if he was in the middle. Instead, Red was leading the pack, with Jill directly behind her. Red's blood dress was the most capable defensive skill among the group, and Jill could still spot traps from that position. Luke and Leah took up the rear, mainly so that Leah could run away if necessary, and Luke was there to guard their retreat, but also because he was their best healer. They proceeded into the dungeon, after grilling Leah on what she should do. This dungeon wasn't convoluted, apparently most of the beginner dungeons were simple and focused on the monsters. They learned that this one lacked many traps and the biggest challenge would be the boss. It could be a creature of any type, even one not native to the dungeon. That made clearing the dungeon hard since no one could predict what the boss would be. As they proceeded through the darkness, they watched for the first sign of movement. They were not trying to hide, if anything they were doing the opposite with Luke lighting up the surroundings. Prepared, they were able to get the first attacks out against the monsters that they saw. Though only Jill could hit targets at that range, and she used her magic to make a cluster of the monsters explode into viscera. The entire cave shook, as he heard a chorus of screaming and stomping heading towards them. Mash could only get a good look at them once they entered the light, and he was disgusted by their appearance. They were hybrids of rats and bats but stood on two legs using their wings to increase their stride. It didn't seem like they could fly, only managing to jump awkwardly. When one fell the rest would trample over them, some even stopping to eat those that died. They were vile, a combination of smooth skin with sickly patches of rat hair. Their face a twisted combination of the two creatures, having snouts that extended outwards, and mouths lined with sharp teeth. Wings of fleshy translucent skin sprouted from their backs, revealing interconnected segments of bones and veins, most also covered in infected wounds. Red lashed out with sharp vines of blood, while Jill let Mash up beside Red. He was glowing with Luke's buffs and made a sharp javelin that kept growing even after it passed through the first monster. Instead, it started branching out in different directions, piercing others. It was like the spike trap from the previous dungeon, but he had full control of it now. It pierced through creatures' limbs, he didn't bother aiming or even killing every creature. Luke stepped up beside Mash and killed any that got too close. He spotted Leah occasionally jumping in and killing a few. Jill was in the back, using her spells whenever they were available. She created little pockets of dead monsters within the group. There were a lot of creatures, but the cave was narrow and made the fight easier. The fight was going well, until he heard a scream from nearby. Dreading what he was going to see, his concern grew as he saw that it was Leah. She got bit on the side, trapping her left arm to her body, and the monster lifted her into the air, others taking the opportunity to bite at her. In an instant she had become a bloody mess, and Luke broke the formation to go save her. Mash grimaced at the motion. Jill was the one meant to save people in this situation, but Luke had moved on instinct. He charged into the monsters, getting a plethora of bites himself, before Luke's body morphed, giving him extra arms to rip apart the monsters biting at him. Jill didn't slack though, teleporting beside Leah and pulling her out of danger. Even with Luke's rage he couldn't hold out forever, and Jill was forced to teleport him out too. Now all three of them would be out of the fight, Luke needing to heal Leah and his injuries, and Jill needing to recover her mana. This left Mash and Red on their own for the rest of the fight. He could hear Red cursing but couldn't understand any of it. Her dress grew longer, turning into a mess of blades and saws. She cut through the monsters easily, adding their blood to her own and increasing the range of her attacks. Not wanting to fall behind, he changed up his tactics. Growing out limbs from his backs, they resembled wings when connected, but that changed as he attacked. The wings separated into independent blades, that swung with each of his motions. He could control each of them, going through his usual attack patterns. The wings cut through everything within his range. They kept growing beyond that, and he could feel some of them get cut by and cut into Red's blood. Between the two of them they covered the cave in a deadly dance of blades and attacks. Their defenses were not perfect, and the creatures edged closer, using the dying bodies of their kind as shields. Mash grimaced as the first managed to reach him. He didn't stop moving, using his hand to block the creature while growing wood from it to pierce its head. The bite landed though, and he could feel its teeth sink past his skin. It died for that bite though, a wooden spike piercing through the back of its skull. He needed to move faster and did something he didn't want to. He carved out a piece of the creature as he pulled his arm away, popping it into his mouth. He held back his vomit and felt the boost to his stats as his carnivorous tree skill took effect. It was more significant than he expected, the meat having been very fresh. He had tested this skill before and knew that although eating creatures with his wooden creations gave him a smaller benefit, pushing through the disgust of the flavor would yield much better results. That didn't stop him though, and he grew his wood from his arms, turning them into wooden jaws and biting through whatever creatures came close. Though he stopped when his inhumanity skill informed him of the venom that was spreading from the bite wound, while his carnivorous tree skill removed it from what he ate. Looking at it he noticed the veins on his hand slowly turning black. Acting on instinct more than thought, he cut off his arm, knowing that his inhumanity skill was controlling him. He didn't bother restraining his scream, growing more wooden limbs, and moving faster. He threw his limb backwards. Red and Luke would be able to reattach it later. For now, he stopped the bleeding by replacing his hand with a wooden construct, allowing him to resume his normal motions. His stats had improved from the eating and at last his persist skill kicked in. His mana territory more than doubled in size with all the bonus stats, and he could easily observe most of the cave. He could see Red falling back, her mana dangerously low. She must have noticed his movements improve and guessed that his skill started working. He grew into a mass of wooden blades and mouths, cutting and biting through creatures by the pack. His improved concentration letting him handle even more diverse attacks, all while continuing his usual motions. There were hundreds of bites across his wood, but it didn't slow down his attacks at all. After all, if one of his wooden creations broke, he simply needed to replace it. Eventually the creatures all died, and he was left amidst a cavern filled with half-eaten bodies. He stopped as he felt the last creature die and didn't bother resisting the darkness that claimed him. He didn't need to wait long to wake up, Red having healed him as soon as he collapsed. Luke was still tending to his own wounds, and Mash spoke realizing that Red hadn't healed him yet. "Stop, heal Luke first." "Venom." He knew he sounded weak but got the most important words out first. Red left him, and he unceremoniously slumped against the wall, watching her run towards Luke. If she hadn't gone to check on Luke yet, she probably just recovered from her own mana expenditure. He could vaguely make out Jill giving Leah one of their general antidotes. He knew it wouldn't work since the venom was too strong, but he couldn't get any words out. He was still too drained and couldn't use his meditation skill. If his limb healed into a stump then Luke wouldn't be able to heal him, so he needed to wait until after Luke was awake to use inhuman hibernation. There was a temporary solution though, and he grabbed a handful of the nearest creature. He didn't do anything fancy to cut or clean it, just stuffing a mouthful of flesh into his mouth. He could feel the food going down, the blood clogging his throat and regretted it the whole time, but it had given him enough stats that he could move again. He formed two wooden mouths and started chomping on the surrounding meat. The bonuses were smaller, but it was enough to start recovering and it lacked the disgusting flavor. He pushed himself up, making his way to the hand that he had tossed earlier, only now feeling the pain from the injury. Tears slowly welled up in his eyes, but he held them back. As he made his way to Red, he saw her leaning away from the rest of them. Hopefully that meant she succeeded. Chapter 35, Blocked Retreat. Mash looked towards Red, asking the obvious question with a simple glance. Red saw the same question on Jill's face, and she looked to be on the verge of tears. Red didn't leave them hanging and started speaking confidently. "They will be fine, their biggest problem was the venom mixing with their blood, but I dealt with it and healed up their surface injuries. Luke can." She trailed off as she noticed that Mash was carrying his dismembered hand. She stared at it uncomprehendingly, and Jill gasped from her side. Mash took a seat next to them and spoke through the pain. "Can you get the venom out? Luke can reattach it when he gets up." It didn't sound perfect, but he got his words out. She just nodded slowly, concentrating on the hand as he held it out to her. Not needing or wanting to touch it, she used her magic to drain the venom from the hand. It poured out quickly, along with whatever blood was still in the limb. It grew sickly pale and he wondered if it would reattach properly. It should be fine, but he needed Luke to wake up. Opening his storage space, he pulled out his water skin, ready to dump it on Luke. It wasn't necessary as Luke bolted upright, frantically looking around for a fight. Mash saw relief flash through Jill's and Red's faces, but anger was beginning to surface. Before they could start berating him, Mash spoke up so that Luke could get started on his hand. "Luke, I'm glad you're okay and everything, but I need you to heal this." Mash spoke while holding up his dismembered hand, that managed to get through Luke's panic. He was grasping the situation, and quickly moved to help Mash, though he did check on Leah quickly. Mash didn't care much, his injuries weren't going to get worse, but he did seem strangely concerned for her. Was it because she was another Beastman, Ella's sister, or was it something more? He would ask him later, for now he needed to be chewed out for his actions. Red and Jill seemed more eager than he did, so he left it to them. Instead, he focused on the healing, watching what Luke's mana was doing to heal him. He had been able to manipulate mana before and thought maybe he could influence his next skill by doing something similar. Luke's mana did not act the same way as Red's healing, and instead of diffusing into his body, it seemed to be returning his body to a previous state. His mana would enter his body, and vanish seeming to disappear, but he could see the healing start as his limb reattached. Red also helped a little, by giving him more blood to handle the new limb. That didn't stop her from telling Luke what he had done wrong. "What happened back there? You know that Jill is the one responsible for getting people out. Running in there was stupid and only made the situation worse." Red's tone was cold, and her glare could freeze the air around her. Luke practically wilted under their gazes, letting them continue to berate him. He managed to find some words, although he spoke to them uncertainly. "I'm sorry. I don't really know what happened. When I saw Leah get hit, I just reacted automatically. It felt like I needed to do something, and I think that would have been true for any of you." There was no justification, Mash knew that, and so did everyone else. It was a mistake and they managed to get through it. Now, they just needed to make sure that it didn't happen again. Mash didn't need to speak, Jill having quickly replied to his statement. "You need to control yourself. I don't know how, but you need to figure it out, otherwise we're all going to wind up dead." She sounded heated but also very concerned, and Luke was only able to nod in response. It's not like he could change himself on demand and would need time to work on it. Honestly, this dungeon was going poorly, and it would be smarter to retreat. At the very least they needed to bring Leah out, she was too volatile and didn't fit easily with their style. Looking towards the girl, he realized that she wasn't unconscious, instead just faking it. He grunted loudly and talked in a way that made it obvious that he was speaking for her to hear. "I think that we should take Leah out of here. It's too much of a risk, and there's no way she would be stupid enough to argue after what just happened." He sounded condescending by extending the sound of the word stupid but thought that she deserved it. She sat up slowly, making sure to glare at him. However, she knew her position and could see the group's feelings on the matter. He didn't know what was going through her head. She almost died but acted like she wanted to go deeper anyways, despite not being an actual adventurer. She didn't argue though, and they only stayed long enough to recover. Mash didn't need long with his hibernation skill, but the others needed a lot more time to regain their mana. Realizing that he had leveled a few times, he decided not to rush his stat allocation. He would need some time to think on it and could wait until they left the dungeon. The short rest wasn't done in silence, Leah having regained the confidence to talk to the others. She was trying to convince them to let her stay, but none of them gave any ground, even Luke refused to entertain her arguments. Realizing nothing was working, she gave up and waited for the others to get ready. They started back up the path, grateful that the dungeon had a linear layout. They walked casually, knowing that there were no monsters behind them. It was a mistake, and Mash felt a projectile headed towards the back of his skull. Only having half a second to react once it entered his range, he managed to deflect it by growing wood from his hair. They formed a small ramp that managed to push the object aside, letting him get a better look at it. It was a plain arrow, and mana territory informed him that the mana surrounding it made it move faster. The others didn't need another signal to react, using their skills defensively. It was probably the bandits. There was a problem though, they were attacking beyond his range and were invisible. Though the attack had come from behind, and that meant that they could run to the exit. He yelled to get their attention, while growing wood from his back to swing wildly behind him. Just go for the exit. He just kept growing the bladed limbs out behind him, making them thicker and disfiguring the terrain. They stopped moving forward when Leah threw a dagger ahead of her. She screamed as the metal weapon was deflected. More bandits! They came to a stop, but Mash didn't stop growing his trail of wood behind him. Still no bandits entered his range, but he kept burning his energy slowly. Persist would make him twice as strong, and he should be able to handle most of the bandits with the boost. The wood hung from his back like wings that draped far behind him. He waited patiently for some change, acting as though he could see them. When they entered the range of his mana territory, he was able to get a measure of their abilities. 3 had entered from the front and 2 others stepped in from behind, but they were weak. They had less than half the mana Mash had and would struggle to compete with Red. Mash relaxed slightly. The bandits' invisibility dissipated to reveal the ones in front of them, though the ones behind them stayed hidden. They didn't try to move closer, instead hovering just outside the range of melee attacks. The ones who revealed themselves were obviously older than them, all were males and hid most of their body with thick robes. The man who stood closest was made distinct by the red tattoo of a spiral across his face. His eyes glowed vaguely red as well, and they looked at Mash condescendingly. The edges of his eyes pointed downwards, as if he were observing children. He started speaking, not hiding his perceptions of them in the slightest. "Hello children, I would hate to have to cause a scene here. So, how about we act like reasonable people? All we need you to do is hand over the lion's sister, and we'll be on our way." His voice was as revolting as the words were, and Mash understood who he was talking about, realizing that Ellis had looked vaguely like a lion. Not to mention Leah was the only one who came from this city. Mash wouldn't do something like that, and the others wouldn't either. Rather than responding, Jill lashed out attempting to kill all 3 of the bandits in front of them. He could see the space warp around them, and the 2 further behind staggered a little, but none of them died. Mash couldn't understand why. Jill was far stronger than the 3 of them. He could feel the ones behind preparing to attack them, so he raised 2 of his dragging limbs to slash through their heads. He felt the wooden limbs disconnect as the 2 managed to cut through his attack. Something wasn't right, they were a lot stronger than his mana territory led him to believe. Red launched needles, lashing out at the group, a few having hit their marks caused the bandits to scream in pain. It didn't stop them from launching into motion. Mash turned to intercept the ones that were still invisible, letting his team handle the visible ones. The rest of the team had active skills to find hidden targets, and he could see them engaging with now invisible bandits. Focusing on the 2 behind him, he blocked 2 arrows with a sword staff that he grew as he ran towards them. He needed to keep them in his range and lashed out at the nearest one. The bandit blocked, parrying Mash's blow to push him aside. Moving with the push, Mash spun while jumping towards the other. He lashed out with his weapon, and it clanged against a metal blade. He made it bend around the weapon's edge to slash at the bandit's hand. The bandit cursed as it cut into him, but Mash had to retreat to dodge an arrow from the other man. He was losing ground to block the arrows, but he managed to move the bandits over the wooden creations he laid earlier. He was about to spring his trap but stopped when he noticed that Jill had taken a blow to her neck. Thankfully, she was near Red, but Red was stuck in a fight as well. The bandit in front of her was shrouded in a black mist, which he knew was shadow mana. Jill was struggling to stop herself from bleeding out, using her shirt to hold the wound closed. Luke was holding his own against one of the bandits but would notice Jill's injury soon. Then he would probably react violently. Surprisingly, Leah was managing well, her invisibility seeming to be better than the bandit she was facing. Though the fight was close since both were aiming for vital points with each attack. The 2 he was facing were weaker than the other 3 bandits, but he was still struggling to end the fight. Now both bandits were firing arrows at him, and he was having trouble blocking them while stopping any other attacks from hitting his friends. They were not ready for this fight, none of them had fully recovered from the previous fight, planning on healing completely once they were safely outside of the dungeon. Being the most recovered, he needed to do something and changed his strategy. Rather than using his limbs purely to attack the bandits, he moved the entire trail of wood towards him. It was a wall of waving blades and spikes rushing from the ground behind the bandits. Now he just needed them to focus on him, so he let his defenses drop, letting an arrow hit him in the leg and dropping his weapon in shock. When he suddenly dropped his defense, the bandits reacted as expected, launching arrows with more power and speed than before, clearly a skill of some kind. He couldn't block them completely, instead choosing to reinforce his armor around his heart and neck. One glanced off his neck, his armor managing to stop the blow. The other was deflected from his heart, but not by much, and punched through his armor. It pierced his chest but wasn't a fatal blow, letting his scattered wings push towards him and tearing the two bandits to ribbons. He couldn't attack the ones in front with his remaining energy, but managed to get the bandits to jump away as his wooden creations tried to cut at them. He didn't stop, growing his wood continuously, feeling the buffs from persist kick in. He made them thicker and spikier, chasing the bandits down and clogging up the cave, but couldn't keep it up forever. Well, he could normally, but could feel the blood and air loss was getting to him. Black dots beginning to appear in his vision. He tried to get Luke or Red's attention. They were busy though, Luke needing to tend to Leah, who seemed to have received a wound to the head. Red was obviously struggling to heal Jill, who had lost a significant amount of blood by now. Even though he managed to kill two of the bandits, it was clear that they lost the fight. Falling limply to the ground, that had been the last thing that went through his mind. Chapter 36, Trapped. Regaining consciousness, Mash turned over and propped himself on his forearms before coughing violently. It was raspy and unclear, blood coming out with each cough, but Luke and Red was healing him now and his breathing quickly turned clear. Mash could vaguely see that the others were okay too, but he couldn't relax yet. Thankfully, he was already near the wood wall that he made. Touching it, he realized that it encompassed the entire cave, and stretched for several meters. He could feel cuts and chips at the other end. The bandits must have tried to get through it but realized that it was pointless. It would take Mash several minutes to make a path for himself, and a lot of energy. Even if the bandits managed to break through, they would be exhausted and could be easily defeated. Knowing that he was relatively secure, he began his meditation. It took almost an hour to fully recover since Red and Luke couldn't heal him. They needed to recover themselves, so everyone other than Jill was left on their own. She was still unconscious. Red was keeping an eye out for her though and let Mash know that she would be okay. Waiting for her to get up, Mash considered the fight in more detail. During the fight itself, he had struggled defeating two of the bandits who were far weaker than himself. That wasn't true though, and he considered what his mana territory skill did. Since he had the time now, he thought on his status, deciding to allocate his stats while checking out the skill in more detail. Name, Mash. Class, Scale Wood Devourer. Level, 33. Health, 770/770. Energy, 1670/1670. Fortitude, 7077. Endurance, 6567. Strength, 6062. Agility, 6062. Intelligence, 90100. Wisdom, 6061. Charisma, 3032. Free stats, 15-0, 10 to intelligence, 5 to fortitude. Skills, persist, mana wood creation, artificial meditation in human hibernation, monosphere mana territory, monk's false core unnatural energy, inhumanity, wooden body, carnivorous tree. Mana territory, passive. Your eyes just weren't enough. Sense the changes in the mana around you. Connect to the mana in your space and inherently understand the nature of the mana. Current range, 10-11 feet. He realized what the problem had been. His method of measurement had been flawed from the beginning, biased from his knowledge of the knights in the kingdom. The general classes had more balanced stat layouts, meaning that comparing mana worked for determining strength. Looking at his own stats, he already realized how skewed his stats were getting. And that it would only grow as time went on. Other niche classes probably focused on specific stats, rather than distributing them more evenly like guards and knights. Which meant that his skill wouldn't be able to judge an opponent's strength, although he could see how it could be used to determine a person's class. Feeling the group's mana levels again, he saw that Leah's mana was smaller than the rest. Approaching her, he talked to her about her stats, revealing some of his as well. She informed him that while all her stats were above 40, her physical stats were almost double her mental ones. Apparently, most of her skills used little to no mana, so she focused on her physical stats as much as possible. At least he knew now, before making any more grievous errors. It was something he could adjust to easily. They continued down through the cave, passing over the battle from earlier. Most of the corpses were dissolving into the floor, as if the dungeon was attempting to reclaim them. They moved past, but slowly, still unsure if there would be more bandits in this direction. They said that there were not many but were also uncertain of the exact numbers. If they encountered bandits deeper in the dungeon, then they would most likely be a higher level than the ones from earlier. Though, based on the previous fight, he doubted that they were well equipped to delve the dungeon. The ones that they had fought had clearly been better at single combat and would struggle against a horde of monsters. The cave didn't go much deeper and broke into open air. Perhaps this dungeon had also teleported them somewhere, rather than existing beneath the ground. The dungeon followed along the side of a cliff, the path was 10 feet across. Easily within the range of his mana territory, and he felt more comfortable walking down it. Bandits wouldn't be able to sneak past unless they were climbing along the side of the cliff. They could make out a few creatures flying along the tops of the mountain, they were apparently in. It stretched upwards, piercing through the clouds. There was no sun in this dungeon, instead the light came from 2 different moons. Though they shone bright enough, and they could see clearly despite the night sky. The other surprising thing for Mash was the snow. It rarely snowed back home, so he enjoyed running his hands across the cold white fluff. They trudged on, the snow only deep enough to cover their shoes. The cold was a bit troublesome, each gust of wind making him shiver. That was the coldest part of the experience. The cave, having blocked the wind, hadn't felt anywhere near as chilly. It didn't take long for them to run into the next type of monster. The packs were a lot smaller than the bat monsters, with only 3 visible creatures in front of them. Each was taller than Mash and was a dense mass of white feathers. It was oddly round, with chicken-like feet that were made of stone. They were engraved perfectly, resembling a bird's foot with fine detail. Mash could only barely make out the creature's head, it blended into the feathers of its body. Though he noticed it when it opened its mouth at their group. It was an odd beak, curving sinisterly. There were no teeth that lined its mouth, but it had a forked tongue that extended outwards. It let out a high-pitched screech and charged at them. It wasn't really a charge, instead it rolled towards them. Rolling, it gathered the snow behind it, quickly turning into an enormous boulder that rushed towards them. He could barely make out that its legs would kick off the ground to send it up the incline. The creature was interesting, but it wasn't difficult to deal with. Any one of them could push the creature out of the way, and Mash stepped forward, starting to make a ramp to send the creature over the edge. As expected, it careened over the ledge, but it didn't fall. Instead, the snow that it picked up turned into wings, and the thing started flying, turning in the air to crash into them. While it startled them, it didn't make them panic, and Jill used her magic to attack the creature. It didn't kill the monster, but it did manage to disorient it and disrupt its creation. It slammed into the mountain below them, and he guessed that it fell to whatever was below. Red lashed out at the next one, using a blade of blood to try and cut through it, but the blade was stopped by the snow, merely staining it like red paint. It was clear that she couldn't control the blood as it mixed with the snow. The creatures seemed to be inherently resistant, and highly adaptive. Luke didn't seem bothered, growing bigger than the creatures and smashing against the 2 that were still coming. The ground shook, and Mash began to hear a rumbling from the mountain. Looking up, he realized that the snow was rushing down the mountain, a landslide that would soon hit them. He reacted by growing his ramp out and moving it so it would line up with the cliff. Landslide. Take cover. Yelling to the others, he stepped beneath the barrier. The others quickly followed, only Luke remaining outside to stop the creatures. He stopped trying to push it back, instead he swung his whole body in a circle, sending the creatures to run off the cliff beside him. He started running towards the barrier, his buffs glowing brighter as he sped up. Managing to barely roll under the shield, the snow ravaged the ground behind him. Trapped, they could do nothing but wait for the snow to run its course. Needing to stay in contact with the wood, he slid to the ground with his back touching the creation. That way he could continue to observe its condition. He just needed to make sure it didn't break and fortify it with energy if necessary. Using the opportunity to make a meal, Red pulled out the cooking equipment. It was Jill's turn to cook, but she wasn't very good at it, so Red started preparing the food. Everyone helped where they could, Mash and the others mostly cutting and peeling vegetables. It didn't take long to make a simple soup. It was mostly vegetables though, and he wished that they had managed to kill one of those monsters from earlier. The meat from it would probably taste pretty good, and he made a mental note to try and get a piece later. The soup wasn't bad though, Red having seasoned it well. The warmth was an even better bonus of the meal, since the temperature seemed to be dropping. Looking over his friends, he noticed that the others were strangely quiet. There hadn't been much talking since the bandits. They were all processing the encounter differently. Mash didn't see the entirety of the fight but saw the results. Jill would have died if Mash didn't save them, and he wasn't sure that Red would have fared much better. If Mash didn't have his trap, and was really caught completely unaware, the bandits would have been able to beat them. Even then, he would have died if it weren't for Luke and Red's healing skills. He didn't think his necklace would have been enough healing for a punctured lung. They haven't had much trouble until this dungeon, so they were confident that they could handle the bandits and monsters of this dungeon. That idea had fallen apart quickly, reality having shown them how overconfident they were being. While the monsters haven't proved too much difficulty, their fight with them hadn't gone well. As for the bandits, they were a lot stronger than expected. The bandits' skills were better at fighting against people than monsters, while Mash and his friends were in the opposite situation. I think the bandits are part of some organization. Red spoke up, having to speak loudly to be heard over the landslide. Mash was staring at her blankly, the others having a similar expression. So? The response was filled with confusion, Jill speaking for everyone. Red sighed slightly before adding the pertinent information. She sounded uncertain but had a lot of information on the subject. It's why they all had similar skills and classes. Organizations like the bandits will know how to get people specific skills and classes. Usually only happens with nobles or governments. It could be the preamble to a war. I bet the guards already know. Then why not send Ellis or Davin down here? Couldn't they kill the bandits? Quickly responding, Jill asked an obvious question. Mash was going to answer but didn't need to as Leah spoke up. They are too high level to enter the dungeon, the only guards that could enter are not strong enough to send in reliably. They don't want to lose the guards' lives prior to a war, and the bandits will eventually have to leave. Mash was surprised to hear Leah's response. He knew that high-leveled people couldn't enter the lower-leveled dungeons, but the latter part of her response rubbed him the wrong way. That meant that the adventurers who they sent down here were considered expendable. There was a bad relationship between guards and adventurers back home too, but he thought they both were still part of the city and would fight for it. This just seemed cruel and wasteful. Mash asked Leah a question, uncertain of how the guild operated in the city. Would adventurers not fight for the city? No. Would you stay and fight? Her response was cold and unforgiving. Her question revealed the truth to Mash: he would not fight for the city. He had only been here for a short while and didn't feel compelled to protect it. Thinking about it, he wasn't certain if he would even bother protecting his home. That got him thinking about what was important to him. Was there even anything he would fight for? Chapter 37, Falling. They were stuck for a longer time than he expected, the landslide lasting several minutes. He didn't need to use much energy to maintain the shield, the wood managing to hold against the weight of the snow. Once it passed, they were happy to find a lack of monsters on the cliff. The snow along the ground was thicker now, reaching his knees as he walked through it. Guessing that the monsters were tossed over the edge, he was disappointed to see that he hadn't gained any levels. Either the monsters survived the fall, or they weren't enough to earn him a level. Either was possible, he had killed a lot more bats and 2 bandits for only 3 levels. His leveling had slowed a lot after his class advancement, and he wondered what it would be like when he was over level 100. What would he have to do for a level? He made sure to check his energy, before attempting to fly. He thought about it when he was hiding, the monsters had been able to fly before and hopefully that meant that he could too. In most cases, dungeons were not a safe place to fly. There were rules to each dungeon and breaking them was dangerous. He didn't know if he could fly but thought to test it since the fight. He grew his wings out, big enough to carry him alone. Taking the dragonfly shape he used before. He found it easier to imitate movements he had seen and found himself using this form more often. He wanted to imitate the large dragon one day but didn't have the energy for that yet. Lifting off the ground he steadily rose into the air. He made sure to stay above the ground since he didn't want to risk it failing while he was over the edge. Falling to death was not in his plans. He got almost 10 feet in the air, before he felt a force push down on him. Like swatting an insect, he was slammed into the ground, feeling his wings crack from the sudden collision. He felt a little sympathy for the little creatures. The snow had cushioned his fall though, and he managed to avoid any injuries that were too serious. He would still bruise a little, but his necklace would be able to heal that up. Well, it looked like he could fly for a few moments, but not very high. He wondered what other rules the dungeon would have. What happened if he fell or jumped off? The dungeon was called the Descent, but he didn't know if there was anything at the bottom. Even when he peered over the ledge, all he could see was fog and darkness. It looked endless. With that test over, they continued down the path. They talked a little but wanted to get lower quickly. The temperature kept dropping, and they worried about how cold it would get. Though, it might warm up if there was a sun in this dungeon, and the time changed. The moons were out, and he couldn't see them moving. Guessing that different sections of the dungeon were at different temperatures, they moved quickly. Luke fell once, almost sliding over the edge, and Jill needed to teleport to save him. The group realized they shouldn't be running along the cliff edge. Slowing down significantly, Red pulled out the heat stone. They passed it around as they moved, sharing the small amount of heat it produced. It didn't take much energy, so they used it without worry. After a short while of walking, they gradually picked up the pace. The temperature was dropping faster, and eventually the bandits would get through the wall. Leah had become invisible, and the others were moving a bit faster. Behind us! Leah's scream had caught them all off guard, and he stumbled as he looked behind. There was nothing there at first, but he saw Luke reacting anyways. He grew bigger, large enough to shield the entire group. It was larger than he had done before, and his buffs shone with blinding light, and Mash could feel the mana drain out of him. He used most of it, in what seemed like a panicked defense. Clearly struggling to keep calm, he braced himself. Mash was about to tell him to stop, but felt the blades enter his mana territory. They were large and sharp, but completely invisible as they headed towards them. He wondered how Leah had seen them, but froze when they collided with Luke. They cut into him, almost severing his arms, and cutting deep gashes in his body. With blood pouring out of him rapidly, he slumped to the floor. Already running out of mana and growing smaller. Not needing to see anything else, Mash started forming a wooden wall behind them. Large enough to block another attack. Also, he grew more wooden limbs across his back and formed them into shields as a secondary protection. At the same time, Jill teleported in, grabbing Luke, and teleporting him to Red. Red started healing him, able to at least seal the wounds and prevent further blood loss. She had to teleport the three of them, as blades of wind tore through the wall. His wall hadn't stopped it, though it did reveal the attacks and slow them down slightly. After the teleport, Red lifted Luke with her blood before starting to run. Teleporting three people consumed most of Jill's mana. From what Mash could tell, she had enough to do it one more time. Mash closed the gaps in the wall, forming another one as they ran. He looked back when he felt his wall shatter. He only caught a glimpse of the creature as the next wall rose. It was a combination of a lizard and a bird, but not a dragon. Its beak-shaped mouth, and taloned feet named it a wyvern. With the difficulty of the dungeon, he hoped it was a lesser wyvern. Unlike a dragon, its wings were connected to its arms, and it let out a loud shriek as more blades of wind sliced through his walls. He didn't know how big a wyvern could get, and this one was already as tall as two of the chicken monsters from earlier. It had feathers at the edges of its wings, and its entire body was a bluish-white shade. It blended slightly with the snow. They ran while looking backwards, and Mash almost slipped from the ledge. With his wooden limbs he was able to correct for the misstep and moved closer to the group. He tried to attack, growing spikes from the wall it stood on, but they were unable to penetrate its scaled skin. His energy was depleting quickly, but he didn't want to trigger his persist skill, and stopped attacking since passing out would mean death. Instead, he stopped growing the wooden barriers, relying on his mana territory to inform him of attacks heading their way. There were only a few more attacks, and most went wide. One managed to slash Red, but her blood armor seemed to melt into her, healing the wound rapidly. She seemed better at healing herself, as Luke was still unconscious. They didn't stop moving, even after the last attack. They couldn't be certain that the creature wasn't chasing or wouldn't attack again. They ran, managing to find the end of the path. It formed into a ledge that hung over the abyss. He continued to grow wooden walls behind him, uncertain if the creature was still following. Moving closer to see if there was another path below, he felt mana surging along one of the walls. He reacted quickly, assuming it was a trap, and jumped backwards, but nothing came, and the others followed his movement in panic. He still waited, expecting something to happen, but finally relented and gave them a response. "I thought there was a trap, there's some weird mana on that wall." They moved towards it quickly, Mash outlining the strange mana signature. It was in the shape of a door, and he guessed that this was the real path for the dungeon. The door itself was as close to the ledge as it could be, and only one person could stand in front of the door at a time. "Can you open it?" Red sounded strangely worried, and he realized that he could see her breath. In fact, he was able to see his own breath now. The temperature was getting dangerously low now. He looked towards the others, before clearing away the snow with a wooden limb. It broke off more like ice but didn't sound hard when it hit the snow on the floor. With the snow gone, he got a better view of the door. It was built into the mountainside, only noticeable due to the engravings. The whole door was enchanted, reminding him of the auction house, though the purpose of these enchantments was different. Within his mana territory it shone the same color as Jill's magic, and he knew that it was some form of space manipulation. After informing the group, they had decided to let Jill open it. Red had identified some of the engravings and found a place to pour mana into the door. Thinking it would be best to use the same mana type, Jill placed her palm over the circular engraving. It seemed to be working, as the engravings started glowing brighter, extending from where she was pouring her mana in. It drained Jill significantly, but the door dissolved. It morphed, changing from the stone wall into a portal of swirling stone. They were planning to enter, this time Mash would enter last. That way he could block the entrance and continue to check for bandits with his mana territory. Jill entered first, followed by Red and Luke. Mash could see Leah's mana despite her staying invisible, and he followed behind her to the door. He started growing some wood to block the path as he entered, but never got the opportunity. Before Leah entered, she turned swinging a dagger at Mash. She aimed at his neck just above his armor. He reacted slowly but managed to avoid getting his head chopped off, instead the blade cut into his neck. Stumbling backwards, he took a strike to his chest, the dagger piercing into his flesh. His step backwards stopped the blade from reaching his heart, but didn't stop her strike from pushing him off the ledge. He let out a grumbled question, blood making his words more difficult to understand. Why? He didn't understand. Why now? He didn't get an answer for the question and watched as she stepped through the portal herself. What about the others? He had been the only one who could see her when she was invisible, and Red was the only one in fighting condition. He tried to reach for the cliff to grab hold, he needed to warn them. He couldn't move, his body felt locked in place. He felt her mana penetrating his body, seeping in from the wounds. She used a skill that she hadn't revealed yet. It was pointless anyways, the cliff beneath slanted away from him, and he couldn't grab it even if he could move. He tried forming his wooden creations, glad to feel them start sprouting. He didn't have much energy remaining and couldn't fly or even grab the wall, instead he tried to contain his injuries as much as possible. Feeding energy into the healing item that wrapped around his neck, he used the remainder into fusing his armor to his neck to stop the bleeding. He used his mana territory to try and fuse his wood with his flesh, like Jill did with her blood. He felt the bleeding stop but was struggling to breathe. With his last remaining energy, he braced for the impact, forming a cocoon around himself, letting it hug his body tightly and stop any errant movements. It cut his vision, sending him into darkness, but he hoped it would blunt and lessen the impact. He needed to survive, if for nothing else than to get revenge. Chapter 38, Fighting Alone. Mash regained consciousness but was still shrouded in darkness. His cocoon hadn't lessened the impact as much as he expected, but it did manage to keep him alive. Honestly, he didn't know how much time had passed. Growing increasingly worried for his friends, he created an opening in the wooden cocoon. Once outside, he saw that his cocoon looked more like an egg. He didn't consciously make the shape, instead just tried to shield his body. The shape it took must have been the first thing to come to his mind. Thankfully, this egg didn't break when it hit the ground. He wasn't in perfect condition, his throat still feeling awkward. Rubbing his hand against his neck, he realized that it felt strangely like bark. He grabbed a mirror from his storage space, having purchased one because of the many changes he underwent. His neck looked normal though, the wooden portion blending in with his skin. It was a scaled patch of the wood, and it felt like the side of a tree as he ran his hand across it. Essentially, it matched with the other patches of scales on his body, though this one felt different. He tried picturing changing it, to allow more air through. A little surprised to see it work, he tried speaking. His voice was different, a little deeper and drier than normal. It sounded like he was speaking through something, his voice vibrating with something unknown. At least he could breathe clearly now. That was all he was aiming for, his voice could be dealt with once he got to the others. Thinking about the others, his mind focused on Leah, and he started to contemplate why she acted at that moment. They were exhausted and injured from the wyvern, but they were in that situation after the bandits too. Even the monsters had caused problems for them, and she could have dealt more damage to the whole group. Was she specifically targeting Mash? He was the only one who could see past her invisibility. Was that why, or was it something else? Who did she work for? If she was part of the bandits, then perhaps they had been stuck on the cliff and she only acted once they found the door. Maybe she couldn't open the door and was waiting for someone who could arrive. It didn't matter, Her motivations wouldn't change what he needed to do. First though, he would need to find a way out. He took in his surroundings, getting a bearing for where he fell. Not knowing what to expect, he was confused to find himself in a forest. His wooden egg tore apart the treetops as it crashed, leaving a small crater in the ground. The floor itself was a mix of grass and stone, but the stone was weirdly a dark green color. It was almost dark enough to be black, but there was a green tint that showed when light hit it. There was no specific path, but climbing the mountain would be impossible. Hoping that there was an entrance along the mountain somewhere, he started walking around its base. The mountain was a single enormous rock. It looked out of place, like something that had crashed into the ground. Honestly, looking at it from here, it reminded Mash of a tooth. Following along the edge, he wondered where the monsters were. With the way the dungeon was set up, he expected hundreds of monsters to be infesting the ground, but he was struggling to find any. He would need to find some eventually. His rations were not unlimited, most of them were being carried by Red. He only had a few days' worth, and only if he ate it sparingly. He was in a pretty bad situation. The only reprieve was that it wasn't cold down here. If anything, it was a little on the warmer side. He continued along the stone base of the mountain, looking for some path upwards. Eventually he noticed something, and he saw something falling in front of him. It was an enormous snowball that collided with the ground. The snow was melting quickly, and one of the chicken monsters rose from the pile. Another landed behind him, a loud thump echoing through the forest. They rose from the ground, uninjured, and started to roll towards him. Without the extra snow they moved faster but lacked the weight and size they had earlier. He wanted to kill them, to collect the meat from their bodies. He figured that he could handle them, forming a wooden spear and propping one end of it against the ground. Growing it thicker to be able to withstand the blow, the first of the monsters ran into it, the spear piercing through its tough hide. It didn't die, and he could feel the wood creaking as it tried to separate itself from the spear. He needed to kill it, to eat it, and he imagined bear-like mouth sprouting from the end of his spear, devouring the monster from the inside out, a growing torrent of ravaging teeth. His creation seemed to respond to his intention over the image, instead forming a single enormous mouth that tore a massive chunk from the creature. It reminded him more of a dragon's mouth, and wondered if he had been subconsciously thinking about it. Maybe his class was naturally taking that shape, and looking back, most of the times he used the carnivorous tree skill, it resembled a dragon's mouth. Was there a natural shape to the skill? Were there other skills that also had natural forms? He would test some of his other skills later, for now he needed to focus on the monsters. The one was dead, and he turned to face the other as the stat bonuses took effect. He turned part of the spear into a sword staff and swung at the creature with his improved stats. Naturally, it didn't accomplish much, the weapon breaking as it cut into its flesh. The creature stopped this time, a foot kicking out at Mash. He thickened his armor as the hit arrived, stopping the talons from piercing his skin. The armor cracked, and he was sent flying from the blow. He grunted as he turned the motion into a roll. Sliding smoothly to his feet, he felt a sharp pain through his ribs as he straightened himself. It started to roll at him. He formed another spear, planning to repeat the same attack as before. Though before the creature rammed into the spear, it kicked off the ground, jumping into the air. It was going to land atop him, and he moved the spear, bending it with his magic to pierce the creature as it fell. It landed atop it, ending up like a piece of meat on a skewer. Making his way to the first creature, he formed a knife out of the wood. Beginning to cut off a section of meat, he realized that he didn't have a way to cook it. The heat stone was with Red, and he didn't have any other fire starters. When he got out, he would buy a fire starter. It was cheaper than the heat stone, and he should be able to afford it. He could eat raw food now, but it tasted vile. However, he didn't have many options and could feel his stomach rumbling. He would need to eat a lot to satisfy himself, and this was the best option right now. Cutting off a large section of one of the creatures, he made a wooden mouth to start biting into the other one. It wouldn't fill his stomach but would give him other bonuses. Taking a deep breath, he put the first piece into his mouth, gagging as soon as he bit down. It was fatty, absurdly so, and was disgustingly chewy as he struggled to swallow it. It felt like it was coating the back of his throat. Through willpower alone, he managed to swallow it. As bad as it was, he still needed more. After eating his fill, he rose from the carcass. He almost threw up as he saw the blood on his hands and remembered the texture. There were a few things he found on the creatures that he thought might be valuable. He collected a few feathers, thinking that they might sell well. Also, he took one of the feet, noticing that the stone was sparkling a little, and seemed to contain some crystals. He could only fit one foot and hoped it would be worth something. It didn't take him any extra time to grab the materials, able to do it while he ate. Finished with the bodies, he continued to move along the mountainside. As he trailed along the side of the mountain, he noticed the trees thinning. He would soon get out of the forest, but still hadn't noticed a pathway to lead him up the mountain. Gaining a level during the last fight, he was hoping to find a safe place to rest and allocate his free stats. He figured it would be safer once he was out of the trees. Picking up his pace, he broke through the wall of trees into an open plain. It was a wide bed of the greenish stone from earlier, and it seemed strangely tiled as he noticed divisions along the ground. It also looked like there was another edge in the distance, perhaps this was just another section of the mountain. He assumed he fell to the ground but didn't know for certain. The thing that drew his eye the most was the monster that was staring back at him. At first glance he thought it was another wyvern but realized that it was more bird-like. Its entire body was feathered, and it had a toothless beak. It wasn't like the chickens from earlier though, instead having a lean body and long tail. Its legs were unnaturally long, and its tail was covered in spikes. It seemed to be some half-wyvern abomination, and its stare dug into him. The eyes shone a pale red, with blood pouring out of them. What happened to it? Before he could contemplate the answer, the creature launched feathers at him. They grew as they headed towards him, surrounding themselves in sheaths of wind. Mash still had his weapon from earlier and tried to deflect the attack. If its blades went through like the wyverns, he would have to flee. Thankfully, the feathers were stopped or swatted away by his staff, and he found it easier to relax. Entering the fight, he flowed seamlessly from each parry as he approached the creature. He didn't get that much closer, instead throwing his weapon as he formed long limbs of wood behind him. It blew the projectile away, easily throwing it off course. Though the motion let him close enough distance to lash out with his wooden limbs. Deciding that gaining stats should be the priority in the fight, each limb ended in dragon-like mouths that snapped at him as they approached. The monster used its own beak to snap at one of the four limbs, breaking apart the wood easily. At the same time, it launched two more feathers at him, and he rolled to the side as the other mouths managed to find purchase on its flesh. Only one had managed to rip a bite from the creature, two of the limbs bursting apart from the creature's movements. It was bleeding now, red now marking its white feathers. With the one limb attached to the creature he propelled himself forward while tearing off a piece of the monster. The creature reacted, by launching feathers from across its body, each flying several times faster than normal. Mash made his armor thicker and raised his arms to block any feathers from penetrating his face. Most attacks lodged into his armor without breaking through, but the ones along his forearm had managed to penetrate his skin. Blood started seeping out from around the feathers, but that didn't stop Mash's momentum. Arriving at the creature, he slammed his spear into the creature. His additional limbs had grown pointed ends and dug into the creature. He hoped it would end the fight when he managed to penetrate one of the creature's eyes, but it didn't stop slamming him with its tail. Several of the spikes had managed to get through his armor, and he felt his shirt become wet with blood. Letting himself be thrown by the attack, he used his limbs to swing around the creature, cutting a large gash along its side as he swung around to the side. Landing to the right of the creature, he stumbled from the speed. The slight misstep let the creature grab him with its feet. Before the talons could dig deeper into his body, he started growing his armor out, encasing the foot and pushing it back. He was trapped by the creature, but it was similarly unable to remove him. It lashed at him, slamming its beak into Mash's chest. Each blow causing his wood to creak, and his breaths to leave. He didn't wait for it to attack though, taking bites out of the creature as it attempted to do the same to him. Mash could feel his energy depleting rapidly as he thickened his armor to stop the pecs. It only partially worked, stopping it from ripping through his chest but not from hurting his ribs. Hearing the first rib crack, he started to panic, trying desperately to kill the creature. Remembering his fight with the other monsters, he started growing spikes out of his armor, trying to let the creature kill itself on its next attack. Having managed to blind it, the creature slammed its head against Mash's armor. Several spikes were driven deep into the creature's head. Though he heard a cracking noise inside his head as it happened. Some of his ribs had broken but didn't know the severity. He had won but was not safe yet. Pushing the creature's head away, sharp pains jabbed at him with each movement. He looked around and found a wall that had a slight overhang in the distance. It looked like it could hide him, and he limped his way towards it. As he got closer, he realized that it was opposite to a ledge. Moving to look over, he saw nothing. It was the void. It looked like he was staring into space itself, as though he were flying among the stars. It was an awe-inspiring sight, but he couldn't appreciate it now. He fell back against the wall, starting to meditate and recover from his wounds. This was as safe as it would get. Chapter 39, Carrier of the World. Mash woke up and didn't remember when he passed out. Maybe his inhuman hibernation skill had thought he needed it to heal properly. He felt fine now but didn't move, realizing that he was in a different location. The overhang he had been hiding behind was different now. It seemed to have opened, turning into a weird portal. Concentric circles of white light were spaced out by the blackness of the void, and in the center, there was a pure circle of the light. The light seemed infinite and all-encompassing, and Mash took an unsteady step backwards. The overhang had been hundreds of feet tall, and this portal filled the entire space. When a layer of rocks rushed downwards closing the portal, Mash gasped, wondering if he had missed an opportunity. Then it quickly opened again, and he realized what he was looking at, as it moved to focus on him. It was an eye, and he instinctively trembled before the creature's presence. Its gaze pierced him, and he felt insignificant before the creature. Taking another step backwards, he planned to run away. There was no other option. He was stopped as the ground beneath his feet trembled, the creature making a noise to speak to him. "Stop!" He was surprised to realize that he could understand the voice. It wasn't in the common language that everyone spoke. The voice itself was a deep rumbling sound, and Mash felt he understood more than what the creature had said, an image flashing through his mind with the word. Instantly, he understood the significance of the creature. Unlike the snake that sounded all-knowing, this creature sounded like it was beyond age, as though it knew it would live through anything. He felt an overwhelming intelligence from the voice, and a surprising amount of benevolence. He somehow understood that his inhumanity skill was making this possible. "Sit." As it spoke, an image passed through Mash's mind, and he understood that it wanted to communicate with him. Refusing didn't seem like a good option, so he took a seat, crossing his legs like he did when he was a child. Mash didn't really know what to do after that, but it felt like the creature was waiting for a response. Trying to be respectful, he gave the creature a proper introduction. "Hello, my name is Mash." He realized he didn't know a better way to introduce himself and made a note to talk to Red about it. Thinking about her, he could feel his worry growing. More than anger or frustration at the betrayal, it was the worry for his friends that was making him tense. After he got his words out, he felt strangely relaxed as the ground rumbled again. The creature was calming him while it was communicating. He didn't try to resist the influence, knowing that it wouldn't work anyways. "Hello, I am the World Carrier." His voice came with a series of images, and the name that Mash heard was clearly his own interpretation of the images. Its real name was something else, but it was beyond what he could comprehend or say. Instead, he saw an image of an entire world stuck on the creature's back, with the creature itself moving the world across the void of space. As it revealed its name, the fear that was filling him drained away, letting him speak more comfortably. "Where are you going?" There was a long pause before the creature's response, and he worried that his question was inappropriate. Although, when its response eventually came, he assumed that it must have been thinking. An image flashed into his mind, an object that was impossibly large and floating in space. The space around it frozen, as if time itself had been stopped there. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but the accompanying word from the creature answered his question. "It is food." Now, why is one marked by the string of fate here? He got an image of himself. Though his response only prompted more questions from Mash, and he felt compelled to ask them. "What is the string of fate? And what do you mean by marked?" It was another name, that he couldn't understand. Instead, receiving a crude translation from his skill. He couldn't place what he was talking about, that was until another image passed through his mind. It was the snake from before, the one that had gotten him his current class. It was the response to the second question that surprised him more. Instead of a series of images, it gave him a rather complete response, seeming to have picked up most of the nuances of talking with him. "Your future has been marked, the string can now observe and influence your fate." Its statement led Mash to another question. "Even now? Wait, can you stop it?" His voice was trembling slightly, and he tried to perceive the mark with his monitoratory. Obviously, it yielded no responses. Though he felt hopeful as he looked at the World Carrier, its rumbling seeming to be in contemplation. Well, that was the feeling that it gave off. "I cannot remove it. Our abilities are too contradictory. I can give you my own mark." That should ward off its influence on your fate. Though its observation will linger. Mash didn't know how to respond. Both because of the clarity of his response, and his own weariness. Another mark, from an unknown being could do anything to him. Though the fact that it wasn't being forced on him, made him more confused. This being was probably better than the snake, but he couldn't be sure that it was telling the truth. Though, it didn't really have a reason to lie. It didn't have a reason to help him either, so he took the risk of asking it. Why? I mean, what would you gain? The ground rumbled, after he asked his question, his voice shaking as the words came out. Mash got the impression of laughter from the creature and felt his shoulders slump as he waited. The creature's voice sounded amused as it spoke. On the other hand, he was struggling to parse the series of images that flowed through his mind. Processing each of the images, he realized what the creature was saying. Though he wasn't left ruminating with his own thoughts, the creature cutting into his mind. Amusement is all I would gain. Your life is destined for chaos, and I rarely encounter humans. With my mark, I would see your life through your eyes. Though it sounded honest, he knew that the creature could easily influence his own mind. The offer seemed too one-sided, he couldn't understand the creature's motivations. The opportunity to remove the snake's influence on his future was important though. He didn't want to be forced into another class, and it sounded like this creature's mark would free him from its control. He wanted to be free to choose his classes again and hadn't been able to come up with his own solution. There was obvious risk here, but the chance was too valuable. He couldn't bring himself to answer with words, only managing to nod. The creature didn't change at all to his response, but he could feel its mana entering his body. He thought that it only did it that way to let him observe the process. However, it was pointless, he lost track of the mana as it entered his body. It reminded him of Luke's techniques, and the mana vanished as it affected something deeper than his physical body. It was a technique that affected his soul, and it was too late for him to back down now. What class do you have? He asked the question, realizing that his situation couldn't get any worse. He felt a strange feeling of confusion pass over the creature. A class. Mash didn't know how to explain a class. Thinking through how he could even bring it up, the creature stopped him from responding. It was unnecessary, the creature had picked up the information as he thought through it. Learning from his thoughts, it responded a little amazed. Yes, I can see it now. It's like the mark the first just placed on you, but far more encompassing. It is melded into every part of your being. The last human who came didn't have something like this. His thoughts swirled in chaos. His whole world was being shaken. If the classes were as in-depth as the creature suggested, then how much could he rely on his own mind? Who created them? Who was influencing his mind? When did it start? Those were only the start of the questions that raced through his mind. It was normally taboo to talk about the personal experiences of classes, but he would talk with the others when he got the chance. In fact, he wanted to talk to his siblings as well. That thought, and the creature's relaxing influence, helped him calm down. He had a million questions racing through his mind, but he needed to find the others. Hoping that they were alive, he asked the creature about them. I came here with some friends. Are they okay, and can you send me to them? The creature sent him an image. It was Red and Jill hiding in a room somewhere. He fell on his back, surprised by how much relief had flooded him. He had been so distracted by all the things in front of him, that he wasn't prepared to feel the tension suddenly vanish. Feeling the rumbling of the creature's laughter, he found himself laughing as well. Images flashed again as he received his answer to the other question. I cannot take you there, but there are creatures in the forest who can guide you. Seek them out, and they will help you. The image that accompanied the words was a mess of colors and appearances, and he didn't really know what to expect from the creatures. He could find them though and had other questions he wanted to ask at that moment. With his friends safe, he wanted to learn as much as he could and talked with the creature for almost an hour. However, his worry slowly returned, and he decided he would come back for the creature in the future. Its mark would let him enter the dungeon, despite any restrictions. After the discussion, he made his way back towards the forest. He learned a lot and needed to spend time meditating to organize his thoughts. The information threw his whole world into chaos. The creature didn't have a class and merely learned how to use his mana to do things. Having tried something similar before, he knew that it could work to some degree but never realized how far someone could go. If anything, the classes seemed more like a restriction. They helped in gaining power quickly but limited a person when they got truly powerful. It seemed like they were designed that way. Even with all the information the being had, it was still limited. It couldn't know everything about his world and only learned of classes from the market placed on MASH. He did manage to learn a lot on dungeons though. They were not small spaces as he expected, but entire other worlds. The dungeons as they were called, were merely pathways between the worlds. The monsters were attracted to the increased mana densities, which explained why cities suffered from more attacks than smaller villages. Wondering about how many people knew, he wanted to check with Red. The other thing he learned was that each dungeon would have someone who set the rules for it. Even his world should have someone who made the rules, the classes were proof of that. It was weird to consider his world a dungeon, but that is what it was. With all the new information, he didn't care as much for his vendetta against the nobles, but he didn't immediately jump the gun again. His talk and the following meditation had done much to clear his mind. For now, he had two goals in mind. The first was to find a way to free himself from the limitations of classes. The other was to meet with whoever made them, which might provide the solution to the first. Neither changed his next steps though, and that was to get his friends and get out. Chapter 40, Monsters. Having been told to find another intelligent species within the forest, he stopped before approaching the first tree, noticing movement among the leaves. Watching them he waited for some change, for a monster to lash out and attack him. Instead, he heard a strange chirping noise, followed by what he thought were words. It wasn't in a language he had ever heard before, but he could vaguely understand what was being said. He got the feeling that his inhumanity skill was letting him communicate with these creatures. What is he? Talk. He kills the asters. He speaks to. Mash heard what sounded like a vague debate. Unable to make out what was talking, he tried his own hand at communicating with them. The creature's intelligence startled Mash and made him think about the other monsters he had killed. How many intelligent beings had he killed already? How many other humans have massacred monsters indiscriminately? How many people knew? He didn't doubt that there would be others who knew the truth. He still felt a lack of regret, of sadness at the thought of killing these monsters. Was that an influence of the classes? How many others thought the same way as him? How much of that was choice? He meditated slightly, forcing the questions away so that he could respond to the creatures. Trying to sound harmless, he talked as quietly as he could manage while still being heard. I do not want to harm you, just looking for my friends. He started taking a few steps back, not wanting to get into another fight without more energy. The leaves rustled, before parting as a few small creatures emerged. He expected birds, but they were not animals at all, instead they reminded him of fruits. Several creatures were peeking out of the leaves, a mix of bright colors. Their skin was oddly smooth, but their bodies were strangely triangular. Their bodies were long, with the broadest end being around their head. They hung along the branches with two long arms that sprouted like stems on an apple. It was not the shape that bothered him, it was the overall style of the creature. They moved like worms, using the narrow end of their body and their long arms to push themselves forward. He didn't think they were dangerous, easily being small enough to crush under his feet. Plus, the world carrier from earlier had told him to find these creatures. He didn't really want to waste time with them but expected that he would have to. In this scenario, he expected to receive some job or demand and waited for the little creatures to come up with their response. He ended up standing there for several minutes, before realizing the discussion would take longer than he expected. He took the opportunity to allocate his stats. Name, MASH class, Scale Wood Devourer. Level, 3338. Health, 900/900. Energy, 1690/1690. Fortitude, 7790. Endurance, 6769. Strength, 6270. Agility, 6270. Intelligence, 100/100. Wisdom, 6165. Charisma, 32. Free stats, 25-0, 10 to Fortitude, 7 to Strength, 6 to Agility, 2 to Wisdom. Skills, Persist, Monowood Creation, Inhuman Hibernation, Mana Territory, Unnatural Energy, Inhumanity, Wooden Body, Carnivorous Tree. He was surprised to see that he gained 5 levels from the last few fights. It seemed like fighting alone was more beneficial than he expected. Guessing that the last monster he fought had given him the biggest contribution, he considered looking for another one. However, he pushed that thought aside, it had almost killed him, and his priorities were elsewhere currently. He was happy with the changes to his stats, even if they weren't very large. However, he was able to fix that by using his free stats. He was tempted to pour most of it into intelligence again, but decided he needed to start raising his other stats. He didn't want to let them lag too far behind. Realizing that his hunger was starting to rise, he pulled out some of his rations, eating them while he waited. They did stop as soon as he pulled out the food, quickly swarming down the trees around him. At first, he thought they were interested in his magic storage device, but their expectant gazes told him otherwise. He tossed them a piece of meat, but it was rudely thrown aside, as one of the creatures spoke aloud. Sweet. Realizing what they wanted, he tossed them some of the sugar cubes. They eagerly caught them out of the air, reminding him of the fishes from back home. Their weird worm-like bodies made the gestures more horrific, and he realized that the arms he saw earlier were wings of some kind. They didn't fly though, using the wings to help drag their bodies across the ground. They seemed satisfied, and he prompted them once again. My friends? Can you take me to them? They are in the mountain, near the top. Seeming far more agreeable after the sweets, the creatures responded easily to his question. Yes, but need kill Ligar first. It blocks path through mountain. We no way. There was an unquestionable amount of eagerness in their voice, but he also noticed a hint of fear as they spoke the name. They were speaking in unison now, their voices intertwining into a serenade of sounds. The musical tones didn't match their disfigured faces, a single empty eye bulged in the center of their heads, and he noticed no openings for mouths. Wondering how they even talked, he trailed behind them as they led him deeper into the forest. He expected to be taken to the mountain and grew a weapon for himself as a precaution. He disguised it as a walking stick but didn't think the creatures cared. It seemed like he gained their trust and found himself smirking slightly. Red would get a laugh out of this story. Sugar has always been the fastest way to gain someone's trust. He tried asking them where he was going, and what the Ligar was, but received only vague or obvious answers. Where the Ligar is or a horrible monster were the only responses that he got. He was frustrated slightly but figured he could observe it alongside these creatures. They avoided the pointy rocks along the trail, and he noticed the smaller ones running away from a falling leaf. It turned out that he was right, as he was brought in front of a clearing, a nest of bushes was visible in the distance. He could vaguely make out several shapes stirring within the brush but couldn't get a good grasp of the creature. What are they? He asked the little creatures again, not really expecting an answer, but received more information than he had before. Long neck and sharp teeth. No attack with magic. Well, that was more than he expected, but the information let him relax a bit. He now knew that magic wasn't everything, but at least it meant the fight would be relatively simple. If the creature relied on brute strength, then Mash would be able to handle it, like he had the chicken monster when they couldn't access snow. Filling with confidence, he stepped into the clearing. He thought about taking the time to grow an extremely large weapon and try to kill the creatures in a single attack, but he remembered that he was technically on the back of the world carrier and didn't want to risk attacking it. This would just be another monster, another fight. With that in mind, he stepped into the opening, surprised when he felt the creature's mana lingering across the entire clearing. Realizing that the creatures said it wouldn't attack with magic, didn't mean that it didn't have any of it. With his mana territory he knew that this was mainly for detection and watched as the creatures moved. They pushed past the leaves, and cursing inwardly, he found himself staring down two creatures. The little guys had made it seem like there would only be one, but maybe that had to do with his translation. It didn't matter, it didn't change what he needed to do. The creatures were identical, looming several feet taller than him. They were certainly strange, as it had the body of a wolf, but its fur was thin and short, and shone a faint golden brown. Its neck outlined by a thick mass of hair, seeming to separate its head from its body. Though it was the creature's head itself that was the most jarring. Extending outwards, it was a long snake-like limb, with scales covering the outside. The creature's neck was easily 6 or 7 feet long, and its head was almost like a snake, but sprouted a sharp curved beak where the mouth would normally be. The strangeness of the combination made it seem more like an unnatural nightmare than a real being. Though the shaking of the ground as it ran towards him, told him the truth. He braced for the impact, changing his staff into a spear, planning to impale it the same way he had done thus far. The point of the spear thrust into the creature, but the rest of the weapon broke as it plowed through it. He was able to roll to the side and avoid the tackle, noticing that the spearhead had entered its body, having broken along the weapon's shaft. His weapons would work. As he rose from the roll, he could see the other creature's swing coming from behind him through his mana territory. Attempting to jump out of the way, he blocked with a new spear, but the creature's head bent around the weapon, its beak jabbing into his thigh. A sharp pain shot through his leg, and he could see blood leaking around the creature's beak. It didn't stop its motion, flinging him across the clearing with a wide swing of its head. He didn't take the hit for free though, forming a mouth on his hand to rip a chunk of the creature's flesh out. As he crashed into the ground, he immediately shoved the piece into his mouth, swallowing without even chewing. Almost large enough to choke him, he coughed as he rose to his feet. He pressed the wood around his leg tighter, both to stop the bleeding and give him better control of the leg. He knew that it was the inhumanity skill that was letting him focus on the fight, but he stumbled when the food empowered him. It improved his stats significantly enough that his speed changed instantly. Though there was more to it than just that, there was a new connection in his mind, something in the distance tugging at him ever so slightly. He almost thought that he heard a voice but gave up trying to hear it quickly. The monsters didn't ignore his paws, both attempting to slam him with their beaks. With his improved speed he managed to roll out of the way of one but took a hit to his side as the other's neck extended. It grew several feet longer, and caught him unready, its beak breaking through his armor. It didn't stop though, forcing its mouth open slightly to release something into his body. Needing to strike back, to push the creature away, he separated from his armor, turning it into the shape of an open mouth and slamming it down on the creature's neck. With his new stats, he used his hands to push the mouth closed. It tried to tear itself away from him, and he let it, but didn't let go of his creation. Instead using it to drag himself away from the other monster's next attack, its head swinging just behind him as he moved. All the while, he grew the teeth on the mouth longer, trying to bite through the creature's head. It started swinging its head wildly, and Mash could feel the wound on his side worsening. He regrew the armor there, but thickened it and tightened it, trying to mix it with his skin like he had done with his neck. He wanted to hold everything in place, while stopping the bleeding as much as possible. The swinging got more violent, and he was starting to see tiny black dots appear at the edges of his vision. He was losing consciousness but didn't know why. His injuries weren't bad enough, his inhumanity skill would inform him otherwise. He needed to kill this one but falling unconscious would mean certain death. He separated himself from the creature, leaving the mouth in place, it would blind the creature. Flying far faster than he expected, he crashed into the bushes from where the creatures had come, hidden by the thick shrubbery. The bush had probably saved him from a more serious injury, but still found it hard to move. There was no point in trying to hide from the creatures, and he charged out of the wall of leaves.